is trying to take the kingdom from David? Absalom. Who is Absalom? Yes, he is David's son. And he has ingratiated himself to David again. He's been back in the city of Jerusalem for a couple of years, and he has won the hearts of the children of Israel, hasn't he? And he has played the role of a brilliant what? Politician. Absolutely. He has played the role of a brilliant politician, and he has won the hearts of the children of Israel. And where did Absalom request to go in order to make the proclamation that he is now king? Yes, a city by the name of Hebron. Some refer to it as Hebron. Why did he go there? Is there any connection that he has to Hebron? Yes, it was his birthplace. It was where his father had originally reigned when he started his monarchy, and so he goes to Hebron. There is a friend of David's who has betrayed him. What's his name? Anybody remember? Ahithophel. Okay, Ahithophel. And what kind of a friend, what role did Ahithophel play in David's life? Yes, he was a chief counselor to David. Okay, and he betrays him, and he is now called also to Hebron to be at this particular place so that they can announce that David is no longer king and that Absalom is the king now. We didn't get to the very end of our questions last week, but does David start making preparations to leave, or is he going to stay? Yes, he's going to leave, isn't he? And he commands his servants to get things ready and that it's time to leave the city. Why do you think David did not remain in Jerusalem? Why didn't he as king stand and fight against this guy who's trying to overthrow the kingdom? Okay, didn't want the city to be destroyed. Probably didn't want his family. The main thing was his family, I believe. His family and, his close people. He knew. Was David kind of surprised by this maneuver of Absalom? Yeah. Most of the time, coup attempts, overthrows, conspiracies, they're hidden, aren't they? And they're not, easily known, and very hard to see sometime by the very one who's going to be overthrown. And David seems to have been surprised by this, and so rather than trying to make any plans, he just immediately decides that I need to leave the city. And he does, and who immediately enters the city? Yes, Absalom immediately enters into the city. So that's where we are, and I've entitled this next section, The Retreat of David from Jerusalem. The Retreat of David from the city of Jerusalem. We have 6 points. Does anybody want to give their outline? We'll go one or two. Jim, point number 1. David leaves. Number 2. Who did? High tub? Okay. Okay, Attiah went with David. Next. All of David's what? Okay, all on David's side pass over Kidron. The reason I'm saying this over is because we're live. Okay, on Facebook, and there's people who are watching Facebook sometime, and they say, we can't hear what the people in the audience are saying, you need to repeat it. So everybody on Facebook, I'm going to look in the camera, everybody on Facebook, I'm recording it. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm just being mean. Okay, yes, number 4. Who does? Yes, the ark is returned to Jerusalem. That's interesting, isn't it? Ahithophel with Absalom. Boy, that's a pair, isn't it? Okay, David sends Hushai back to Jerusalem. Good. Anybody else want to give theirs? Nobody else. You don't want it to be broadcast over the Facebook. I know. All right, Abby, let's do it. Number 1. The king leaves.
The lawyer follows.
Ooh, number 2. The lawyer follows. The people weep. Boy, she's getting shorter and shorter. The faithful trust. The agony continues. Ooh, the spies of King David. Man, that's almost like a show you want to watch. Comes on Sunday night, 7 o'clock. Boy, that's good stuff right there. I mean, I'm serious. That'd rope you in. I'd be watching. Guarantee you. Good stuff. All right, we'll leave those alone and we'll get into the questions. How about that? All right. Question number 2. When David left Jerusalem, who did he leave behind? His concubines, yes. And the king went forth and all his household after him, and the king left 10 women, which were concubines. What in the world is a concubine? It sounds like a fruit. Doesn't it? You know, go get your concubine, peel your concubine. No, that's what it sounds. But what is a concubine? Yeah, it's kind of a second level wife, isn't it? A second tier. Although she has all the privileges of a what? Of a wife. I mean, she's considered to be the king's wife. And that's very important to this particular story, okay? Very important to this particular part of the conspiracy. Here's what's interesting. Why in the world did he leave them behind?
Keep the house.
Are you kidding me? That's what it says in verse 16. To keep the house. Did David know it was dangerous to leave? I mean, and that's why he left. He knew it was dangerous, didn't he? Folks, he knew he could be what? He knew he could be killed. And for some reason, he makes this crazy decision to leave 10 concubines behind to do what? To keep the house. To keep the house. Who cares about the house? Right? Here, did you hear what Larry said? He may have thought about coming back. He may have. Guys, when I say there's a reason why these women were left, do you understand what I mean? Nobody? It's more than to keep the house. Okay? But David doesn't know. David just thinks in his mind that I'm doing what? Leaving them to keep the house. But there's another reason that they're there. And it has to do with something in the plan of the Almighty God. Okay? And very, very interesting. It's kind of like what we talked about this morning relative to the crucifixion. Here are all of these prophecies being brought to pass. Mankind was bringing them to pass, and yet were they intending to do it? No. No. There were probably 50 or 60 prophecies during the crucifixion of Jesus that came to pass, and mankind brought them to pass, and yet they never intended to do one of them, but they did. And the reason is because God's providence is involved in the lives of men. God's providence is involved in the life of David. And so just be aware of that, okay? God has made a prophecy that must come to pass if God is God. And therefore these 10 women were left in the city of Jerusalem. Where did David go when he first left Jerusalem?
And the place was very far.
Yeah, isn't that great? And the king went forth and all his household after him and tarried in a place that was far off. Don't ask me where, okay? All I know it was what? Far off. Folks, when you're walking, it don't take long to get afar off, does it? Okay, but somewhere afar off. Afar off from what? Afar off from Jerusalem and the palace, right? Far enough that he felt safe from the threat of Absalom and the overthrow. Okay, I don't know exactly how far. Okay, true or false? David's servants passed on beside him. True. It's interesting that David still has loyal people, doesn't he? Here's what's interesting, okay? Guys, this happens in churches as well. What we have in the city of Jerusalem is a division of power, do we not? We have a man who is the ruling king being overthrown by a son who now has power, doesn't he? But what's interesting is that both sides have faithful followers, don't they? You ever seen a church split? Why is a church split? Okay? If it were just the preacher, right? And he left, but he didn't have followers, could they go somewhere else and start another church? No. The one guy, you know, he ain't gonna, if it's just one guy, he's not gonna go what? Start a church. But if he has a set of faithful followers, even if it's only 5 or 10 or 15, guess what will happen? They will follow him, won't they? And David still has faithful individuals by his side. And so the kingdom is really what? The kingdom is really divided at this particular time. Okay? David has the smaller group of individuals, but the kingdom is divided. What other 3 groups passed on before the king as well? Okay, the Kerethites, Perethites, and the Gittites. We've talked about the Kerethites and the Perethites in times past, but we've never made mention of the Gittites. Okay? And these Gittites are some interesting people as far as commentators are concerned because they have a hard time explaining who they are. Okay, you'll get all kinds of stories about who these individuals are. Some believe that these were true residents of the city of Gad who had come to David while he was in his wilderness wanderings and made up a part of his band of men. Okay, and so that's why they're called Gittites from the city of Gad. Okay, there are other individuals who believe that these individuals were really Jews who had at one time lived in Gath. Okay, because Gath was really a city of who? It's really a city of Israel. Okay, it had been taken by who? It had been taken by the Philistines. Okay, so they believe that they were really Israelites who had lived in Gath at some point in time, and therefore they are referred to as Gittites. I don't know for certain which one of these individuals are. If they were, how would I say this? If they were Israelites from Gath, it was because at one time Gath was not a part of the Philistine territory. If they were the literal inhabitants of Gath, then they would have been what? Philistines. Okay, that were loyal to who? Loyal to David. Okay, so very, very interesting group of individuals. Mark that in your little book, Questions When You Get to Heaven. Okay, who are these Gittites? Okay, you're going to have an encyclopedia of questions to ask, but you got eternity to ask them. Okay, how many men did these 3 groups account for? 600. 600 men which came after him from Gath passed on before the king. Folks, is 600 a large number? How'd you like to put 600 in here? Would that be pretty big? Yeah. We'd be busting at the seams, would we not? That's a, you know, and we're talking about he's leaving at what time of day? Night, okay? He's leaving in darkness. These are just 600 of his men. This doesn't include his family, his servants that are in the palace. There could have been 700, 800 people exiting the city of Jerusalem at this time. Now, folks, that is a lot of people, is it not? Walking through the wilderness in the cover of night. So, very, very interesting. What question did David ask Ittai the Gittite when he saw him departing with him? Yes, and the king said unto Ittai the Gittite, Wherefore goest thou with us? Who is Ittai? Anybody know? Did you do any research on him? Was he just some dude that just showed up? Okay. Folks, he was a commander of 1/3 of David's army. Okay? 1/3 of David's army, according to 2 Samuel 18, verse 2. Okay? Some suppose that Ittai was the son of Achish, king of Gath. Had David ever lived in Gath? Yeah, he had lived in Gath for a period of time. Okay, he had dropped his family off in Gath, had he not, for a period of time. His mom and dad, in order to be protected when he was fleeing from Saul. Gath was a very important part of David's life, and this Ittai, who came from Gath, was a very important part of David's army. But if he was from Gath, most likely he was a what? Most likely he was a Philistine. Especially if he were the son of who? Achish. Remember, Achish is the king of Gath, right? So now here David has the king's son as his third in command. And now there's an overthrow. And normally, a foreigner, would he be loyal to the man who's being overthrown, or would he be loyal to Absalom? Most likely he would see this as an opportunity, wouldn't he? Oh man, I'm losing my power, I'm losing my position, David's being run out, what am I going to do? He would stay loyal to Absalom. But all of a sudden he shows up, doesn't he? And there he is, loyal to who? Loyal to David. And so David just asked him, wherefore goest thou also with us? What did David urge Ittai to do? Yes, return unto thy place and abide with the king. Was Ittai putting his life in jeopardy by following David? Oh yes, anybody was. Okay, but this man would be a what? He was a foreigner. Why would you put your life in danger for me? Go back and be loyal to who? Be loyal to the king. Don't put your life in jeopardy. What three reasons did David give to encourage Ittai's return to Jerusalem? Number one, he was a stranger, a foreigner. For thou art a stranger. Okay, number two.
Exile.
He was an exile, and also in exile. Let me ask you something. Why do people, or what is one of the requirements to be an exile? A refugee. What's one of the requirements? Wherever you fled from, your life was what? In danger. So he had fled from wherever in order to come to Jerusalem to be what? To be safe. Now David's having to leave what? Leave Jerusalem. And if Ittai goes with him, that puts him in what? Puts his life in jeopardy again. Okay? Because now the refugee is back out there in the open. He doesn't have the protection that he had when he fled to his place of safety. So he's back in some pretty dangerous territory. And what's the third reason? Whereas thou camest but yesterday. Now that doesn't literally mean yesterday. Folks, he didn't come yesterday and David hired him to be third in command and then, he's got to flee the next day. What does he mean by that? Yes, very, very recently. It's just been a short amount of time that you have fled as an exile to come to safety, and now you're having to what? Flee again. Don't do that. David is looking out for Ittai, isn't he? You go back and you stay with Absalom and you be safe in that particular position. Okay? Very interesting.
Was there a time that David recruited soldiers from Gath?
Oh, I'd have to go back and look, Larry. Larry asked, was there a time when David recruited soldiers from Gath? And I'd have to go back and look.
Well, one of the commentators you referred to said that it could have been Jews there. Yet David talks about them being a stranger and exile. It sounds as if he's saying you really are not Jews and have a part in this war.
Well, see, there's two ways, and that's what we were saying a while ago. There's two ways to look at these Gittites, these people from Gath. And, if they were Jews, then, they were living in Gath. They may have even been living there under Philistine occupation. We don't know that for certain. But this man appears to be a what? He appears to be a true Philistine, doesn't he? Okay, because David calls him a what? He doesn't call him a brother. He calls him a what? A stranger. That's a foreigner. Okay, so David knew that he was a foreigner, that he was in exile, and now he's leaving, putting his life in danger, and he had just been there a short amount of time in and around the city of Jerusalem and in Judea. Number 11, seeing I go whither I may, blank thou, and take back thy blank. Blank and blank be with thee. That's hard to do as a group, isn't it? Seeing I go whither I may, return thou, and take back thy brethren. Mercy and truth be with thee. David right now acknowledges that he has no clue what his future is going to be. Okay? You ever had that happen in your life? Everything's just thrown into turmoil and you have absolutely no clue what the next step's going to be hardly. Okay? You're just living minute by minute, day by day, just trying to function. Folks, David is right there. Okay? And David had no problem with him and his brethren, the ones that he had brought with him out of exile, going back and being under the reign of Absalom. Now notice this. He wishes them what? Blank and blank be with thee. Mercy and truth. Folks, that was a common expression among the Jews. Proverbs 3:3, let not mercy and truth forsake thee. Bind them about thy neck, write them upon the table of thine heart. Jim?
It seems to me he's trying to test them to see if they're new to him as well. He only came yesterday.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a test or not. It's hard to...
I mean, where do you loyalties lie? Why are you coming with me kind of thing?
Yeah.
And can I really trust you? This next question will give it away, I think.
It may have been a test, but it's hard to tell. It seems that David's very concerned about Attai leaving the safety of Jerusalem as an exile. Okay, but it may have been a test toward him. It's hard to tell. Folks, the word mercy simply means kindness, and the word truth, preservation from error and delusion, faithfulness of God. So he wishes mercy, kindness upon this man, and he wishes truth upon him to be free from any kind of delusions or any kind of errors. What was Attai's answer to David? And Attai answered the king and said, as the Lord liveth, and as my lord the king liveth, surely in what place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there will I also, or also will thy servant be. Is that a loyal person? Man, you only need about 10 of those. You know what? You only need about 10 of those who will follow you regardless. Life or death. It doesn't matter. Now I find it interesting that he puts on there, it doesn't matter life or death. You see, he knew what? He knew there's the threat of death if I stay with David. And he says, it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to be loyal to David. I wrote down this statement, loyalty demands that choices be made. Doesn't it? Yeah. Guys, if you're really going to be loyal to someone, sometimes there's going to have to be choices that are made, aren't there? And it's not always easy to be what? Loyal. Was it going to be easy for Attai necessarily? No. Was it going to be easy? He was under threat of death if he left. But yet, he made the choice, didn't he? It was Attai's choice to go with the king along with his family. He was willing to accept the risk associated with his choice. You see, when you decide to be loyal, guess what you've got to do? You've got to accept the risks. Are there risks for being a Christian? Yes. And guys, if you're going to be loyal, guess what? You've got to accept the risks. Okay? Or else you won't be what? You won't be loyal anymore. Okay, so loyalty comes with certain choices that have to be made. Very, very interesting. Number 13. Attai passed over with David along with his men and all the little ones with him. True, very good. Number 14. And all the country wept with a blank blank loud voice. I wrote this down. There are days in histories of nation that causes the entire public to sorrow. Does anybody know what today is? Don't say Sunday. I knew somebody would. It's the day of the anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Today is. Was that a sad day in the nation of the United States? Yeah. Did the nation weep that day? Yes, folks. Folks on both sides. It was a different world back then. Okay? Different world. Okay? And both sides wept. You see, there's days when that happened. 9/11, did the nation weep? Yeah. Folks, we wept as a nation, didn't we? And now we have the people weeping as they pass over. Notice it says with a what? A loud voice. Okay? Not just with a voice, with a loud voice. Conspiracies and regime changes are difficult for every city, for every country and every citizen of that country. People wonder about their future. People hurt for the one who is wronged, don't they? Wouldn't you like to pull some of those folks aside and ask them, why are you crying? You could write a book, couldn't you, on the answers that they might give? I'm crying for myself. I'm crying for my family. I'm crying for my children. I'm crying for my future. I'm crying for my king. I'm crying for Absalom, and he is doing this kind of a thing to this nation. Folks, there's a lot of reasons that individuals may have been crying on that particular day. Very, very sad. Which way did the people go after they passed over Brook Kidron? Yes, toward the way of the wilderness. Uh-oh. Was David familiar with that way? Yes. He had already been in the wilderness for years. When? During Saul's reign, hadn't he? And now all of a sudden, where does he find himself? Right back out in the wilderness. Oh, joy. You know what? Unreal. Guys, when you read about these little brooks, like the brook Kidron, okay, most of the time they do not have running water in them, okay? There is a rainy season in Israel twice a year, okay? Fall and spring, and during rainy season, these little brook, like the brook Kidron, they will fill with water, and there will be, a pretty good little creek there for a period of time, but once the rains dry up, the creek dries up. So it wasn't like they were having to cross over this, big creek or brook or whatever. Most likely it was dry at this particular time, and they could very easily cross over. All right? True or false? Zadok and the priests refused to go with David. False. And lo, Zadok also, and all the Levites were with him. Who is Zadok and who are these Levites? Yes, the high priests and then the priestly tribe. Does that tell you anything? Does it tell you anything? Yes. Guys, these are the religious leaders, are they not? Okay? And they've got to make a choice. Are we going to follow Absalom or are we going to follow David? And they make that choice, hopefully, based upon what? What they believe the will of God is, don't they? And who is the rightful king and who is the one they ought to follow. And all of a sudden, we find Zadok and the priest not following who? Absalom. They're following David. And it puts kind of a check mark beside David's name that even though he's being wronged, he is still what?
The king.
He should still be the king, and he's still the one who is right. Okay? What did Zadok and the priest bring with them? Bearing the ark of the covenant of God, and they set down the ark of God. Does that concern you? No? That they're toting the ark? Where did they have to go to get it? They had to go into the tabernacle. They had to go into the most holy place to get the ark out. Were they supposed to? That's terrible English, isn't it? Supposed to. Guys, the high priest was to go in that temple one time a year to get that ark. Okay? And that's the only time he was supposed to go in there. But here they feel the threat of an overthrow of the nation. And the thing that they want is what? We want the presence of God with us. Right? Had the ark been used in times past in an attempt to protect Israel and the nation? When? Yes, early, before Saul was even king, right? Okay, or he had just been selected as king. He hadn't officially took the position, and all of a sudden you've got this problem with the Philistines, and they bring the ark to the battlefield, right, for protection, and what happens? It gets stolen, doesn't it? And it gets taken by the Philistines. And it's out of Israel for a period of time. You see, sometimes man puts trusts in objects rather than in God. You know that? We can do that. You know that? Trusted object. What's that?
The ark was used as an idol in that instance.
Yes. And, we don't find any authorization by God to move this ark, do we? We don't find that they went and consulted God about the matter. All of a sudden, they just show up and what? Hey, Dave, look what we got, man. We got the ark. I don't know. It was done at their discretion. No indication that God approved of that. What other individual was with Zadok at this time? Yes, Abiathar, a man by the name of Abiathar. And Abiathar went up until all the people had done passing out of the city. Who is Abiathar? Not Zadok's son. He was the son of Ahimelech, the high priest that Saul slew at Nob along with the other priests. Okay? Abiathar, the one who had escaped. So now we have two men functioning as co-high priests. Abiathar and who? Zadok at this particular time. And both of them apparently had approved of what? Moving the ark. Because they brought it, sat it down with David. David was glad to see the ark and allowed it to go with them. Isn't that interesting? The text says that the king said unto Zadok, carry back the ark of God into the city. Had David struggled with his ark for a while? Ever? Oh, he had? This ark had caused David some grief in times past, had it not? When he tried to move it into the city of Jerusalem, put it on that cart pulled by oxen, and Uriah, not Uriah, who is it? His name will hit me in a minute. What is it? The other guy's name was Ahio. Oh, that's terrible. Not Uriah. See, you get a name stuck. What is it? No. Not Uriah. Uriah was the Hittite who died, that David had killed. What was his name? We got 10,000 Bible scholars in here, and none of us know squat. Uzzah. Uzzah. That's it. Uzzah. Yes. Poor old Uzzah. Y'all go home and pray for Uzzah and apologize to him for forgetting his name. Wow. Yes. So David had some problems with the ark. And David said what? Take the ark back to the city. I find it interesting that the priests take it and David wants to take it back. Where was the rightful place for it to be? The rightful place was the city of Jerusalem in that tabernacle, folks. You don't think God can protect His ark from whomever? Yeah, God can protect His ark. He don't need David. He doesn't need the priest to protect His ark. Okay? And the ark in and of itself has zero power, does it? It doesn't have any power. Okay? It's just a what? It's just a box, isn't it? That's all it is, unless God somehow is associated with that box. So David refuses to take that ark back. Why did David refuse to allow the ark to go with him? That's right. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, He will bring me again and show me both it and His habitation. If God wants me to be back in the city of Jerusalem, guess what? He'll bring me back. And I'll see the ark, and I'll see, notice how he calls it, its habitation. What is the habitation of the ark? The temple, folks. That's the ark's habitation. That's where it's supposed to be. And so David remains true, doesn't he? God put the ark in the temple. It's finally there. Why in the world would we move it? If God wants me to be back in this city, He will bring me back to this city. Folks, that's trust in God, isn't it? You see, this is where David is an interesting character, isn't he? You know, sometimes he messes up, doesn't he? And then there's other times in his life when he's just so faithful and so dedicated and so committed to God, isn't he? And just puts his total faith and trust in God. And that's what he's doing on this particular occasion. Mary Ann said, it sounds like us. And that's true, isn't it? So true. If God no longer had any delight in David, how did David feel about that? Oh, yes. But if he thus say, I have no delight in thee, behold, here am I. Let him do to me as seemeth good unto me. Had that statement ever been made before? Does anybody remember Eli, the high priest? Okay. And Samuel was serving in the temple, and he received a vision from God. And he told Samuel that he was going to take care of Eli and his sons. And Samuel didn't want to tell him, did he? He finally told him, revealed it to the high priest, and Eli said what? Whatever the Lord says to be done is good with me. Folks, that's the attitude we need to have with the will of God. Okay? And that's where David was. Let God's will be done in the matter. If He delights in me, He'll bring me back. If He doesn't, guess what? That's His will. And he bowed to the will of the Almighty God. And it's not always easy to do that. Number 22. David asked Zadok if he were a seer. True. The king said also unto Zadok the priest, Art not thou a seer? What in the world does that mean? One who sees the future? What do we call him? Just a prophet. Yes, just a prophet. You can go back and there's a passage that says that before this time they were called seers, talking about the prophets. Okay, a seer, one who's able to see where? Into the future. So I find it interesting. He's not just a high priest, he's also a what? A prophet. Okay? To hold two important roles in the nation of Israel was pretty interesting, wasn't it? David held two predominant roles, did he not? He was not a what? He's not a priest, because he couldn't be. Wrong tribe, right? But he was a what? He was a prophet, and he was also king of Israel. So he had three major positions in Israel: prophet, priest, and king. Jesus is our what? Prophet, priest, and king. He holds all three positions in the nation of Israel. Okay? In the nation of His church. Very, very interesting about Jesus Christ. Okay? Let's see. Where are we? A seer. It's 1 Samuel 9:9 is the place. For he that is now called a prophet was before time called a seer. Who did David want Zadok to return to Jerusalem with? Okay? Yes, return into the city in peace, and your two sons with you, Ahimaaz thy son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. So why does he call him a son? Why would he call, one of them was a son of Abiathar, one was his personal son, but he calls both of them what? His sons. Why? Okay, yes, they're Levites. Abiathar and Zadok are what? High priests. And so their sons are next in line to the throne. So it just expresses the closeness that existed between these two men and their what? And their families. Okay? Close enough that both of them considered each other's son to be their son. How long would David continue in the wilderness? All right. See, I will tarry in the plain of the wilderness until there come word from you to certify me. Wow. Interesting word, isn't it? Anybody look up the word certify? Okay. Strong says that it means this: to front, to stand out opposite. The priest would be able to tell David that the opposition against Absalom was successful and that David could return to the city. Okay? So he says, I want you to go back and I want you to certify me if that's what happens. Okay? So he would be the one who would be in opposition to Absalom. Brown, Driver, and Briggs says to tell, make known, announce, report, declare, proclaim, publish, acknowledge. You tell me when what? It's safe to come back to the city of Jerusalem. Okay? True or false? Zadok went back to Jerusalem, but Abiathar stayed with David. False. They both went back. David went up by what ascent? The Mount of Olives. Good. What three things did they do as they went up? Wept. Head covered. And what? Bare feet. I could do the first two. I don't like my feet to be bare. Okay? I'd have tried to grab my sandals somewhere. Okay? True or false? The people went up with David and covered their heads and wept also. True. What was David told about Ahithophel? Ah, can you imagine that, folks? He didn't have a clue. Who is Ahithophel?
David's counselor.
Yeah, my chief counselor. And all of a sudden, it's bad enough that your son's overthrowing the kingdom, right? And now he's told what? Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. A scoundrel, isn't he? David writes in Psalm 41:9, and I mentioned it in my lesson this morning, Yea, mine own familiar friend, in whom I have trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. You see, Ahithophel would have been one of those individuals who sat around David's table every day. That breakfast, lunch, and dinner were served. That's how important he was. Okay? And now he's lifted up his heel against David. When David heard this, what prayer did David make?
Oh Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Absalom.
Yes, and David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into what? Foolishness. I looked up that little word foolishness, to be silly, to be made foolish, to be turned into foolishness. You see, Ahithophel appears to be one of the leading advisors now of who? Of Absalom. And so Absalom's going to do what Ahithophel counsels in order to overthrow the kingdom. So David now prays, I want all that he says to Absalom to be turned into foolishness. Who came to David at the top of the mountain? Hushai the Archite came to David. Hushai was a close friend of David. He was from the town of Archi. If Hushai went with David, what would he be to David? A burden, yes, he would be a burden. Whom David said, if thou passes on with me, then thou shalt be a burden unto me. Isn't it funny how a crisis causes us to be gut honest with other people? You know, we don't really have any understanding of why he would be a burden. Some have said that he may have had a disease, he may have been crippled, he may have been an old man who wanted to go with David, and he would have just what? Hindered the progress. So he's very honest with him. And what does he counsel Hushai to do?
Return to the city.
Yes, he becomes kind of the go-between between who? Between David and Abiathar and Zadok. Okay, he can report information to who? He can report information to those two priests. They can then report it to the sons, and the sons will do what? Make certain that I get it back. Folks, David's no what? David's no fool on this particular occasion. He leaves a group of individuals in the city who he trusts to do all he can do to reestablish his power in that city. And who does he keep his trust in the whole time? God. Remember, he says, let God do with me what he wants to do. And he prayed to God to turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. He just turned it over to who? Turned it over to God. Folks, pretty good lesson there. I don't know if I could do that right in the middle of a conspiracy. Just give it to God. I'm gone. God will take care of this. Man, you get to that point in your faith, you're good. Thank you, thank you.